Hi everyone, and welcome to the lesson on deviance and social control. Let's start off with a definition of deviance. Deviance is any transgression of socially established norms. In any society, you're going to have formal, written down, codified laws about what is considered acceptable behavior and what is considered unacceptable behavior. You're also going to have norms that are more informal, unspoken rules about how we should behave. And so just like we have informal and formal rules about behavior, you can break those norms and be deviant in informal and formal ways. So an informal deviance is something along the lines of, say, not saying bless you when someone sneezes. Now, there's no law against this. There's no codified rule that suggests that there's punishment if you don't say bless you if someone sneezes. It's just considered impolite. And so this is an example of informal deviance. Formal deviance, on the other hand, is codified. So things like speeding 5, 10, 15, 20 miles an hour over the speed limit is an example of formal deviance. Most things that we consider crimes are examples of formal deviance. If it's codified into law, it's considered formal deviance. While a lot of people think when they hear the word deviance, usually underconforming set of behaviors, such as not meeting basic rules about human behavior, for example, not saying bless you, or for example, not saying excuse me, or perhaps something like not holding the door open for somebody behind you. These are only underconforming examples, meaning we refuse or fail to conform to some of the expected behaviors of us. However, there's also overconforming deviance, where you take the behavior over the top. So, for example, a lot of athletes engage in overconforming behavior. In a lot of sports, it's encouraged to be quite dedicated, and sometimes athletes can take this to the extreme. So you have athletes, runners, for example, that will run while injured, sometimes severely injured, and sometimes against doctors' expectations, right? And so what they're doing is they're over-conforming to the sport's norms. The norms of the sports demand dedication, but they are going over the top and over-conforming. So there's examples of underconforming and over-conforming of deviance. And so this will kind of help us understand the rest of the lesson, to really get a sense of the sociological viewpoint of deviance. We need to talk about social constructionism, and to contrast what social constructionism is, we can think about this word, essentialism. Essentialism argues that basically when you see something in the world, that it exists regardless of what we think about it, that it has some kind of essential characteristic or property to it that you cannot take away. So when it comes to deviant behavior, essentialists argue that certain behavior is just always universally wrong, that we do not live in a socially constructed world, that there is only one truth, and that includes when it comes to behaviors about deviance, that certain deviant behavior is just considered wrong no matter what. Social constructionism, on the other hand, believes that what we think of as wrong is dependent on the time and space that we're currently encompassing and that we're currently inhabiting. So just like cultures can change from one area to the next and from one point in history to the next, so do rules about how society should behave and how certain individuals should behave. So, for example, it was once perfectly legal to segregate blacks and whites in Jim Crow South. This was considered actually an essential aspect of people and of the so-called races in our society. that they should be separated was seen as correct and right. However, looking back, we know that this is now, an unacceptable way of doing things. Another example of social constructionism is our views of drugs and how they've changed. So at one point, things like coca wine, which contained actual cocaine, and heroin and cocaine tooth drops were sold over the counter and suggested to be used by our physicians. So the fact that they were once considered safe and considered acceptable to consume demonstrates that our views on drugs are an aspect of our socially constructed world. Let's go into some theoretical understandings of deviance. For example, let's first take a look at labeling theory. Labeling theory is considered a societal reaction theory, meaning that it focuses on how society applies the label of deviance. Deviant behavior is considered behavior that is labeled deviant. So it's not so much the individual that acts a certain way and that they themselves are conducting deviance. It's not until someone or a group of people come by and label that act as deviant that you can say that deviance has occurred. These negative labels that are then attached to these individuals serve as the basis by which they are viewed and also how they view themselves. A classic study in labeling theory and how it works is the study of the saints and the roughnecks. In this study, there were two groups of high school students, two group of high school boys. One group, which by the researcher was labeled the saints, basically avoided the negative label of deviant. So you had the saints and the roughnecks, and both groups vandalized. Both groups drank underage and consumed, engaged in other illicit substances, and both committed a variety of different petty crimes. However, only the roughnecks were ever really punished harshly, and more importantly, only the roughnecks were seen as bad kids. The saints' behavior usually went unnoticed, usually was forgiven. Usually there were excuses made about why they were conducting what they were doing. The main difference that the researcher found was not in the behavior of the saints and the roughnecks, but in people's perceptions of those behaviors. And one of the mitigating factors that resulted in this discrepancy was the fact that the saints came from not just middle class backgrounds, but the saints had mothers and fathers who were important figures in the community. They had mothers and fathers who served as police officers, served as teachers, served as church leaders. And so, because the saints came from quote unquote good families, they were immediately labeled as good boys. Meanwhile, roughnecks did not have the same protection from society when it came to their antics. This leads us into today's day and age where we have a similar issue going on, but on a much broader level, and that's the so-called phenomenon of school to prison pipelines. So this phenomenon is multifaceted, but part of it has to do with labeling theory. So first of all, we have the issue of inadequate resources in many of our public schools, especially in larger cities, especially in cities with large immigrant demographics or large concentrations of poverty. You're going to see overcrowding, teachers that are under-resourced and overworked, teachers that are expected to be both counselors, social workers, and also teach material, as well as be disciplinarians. Most of these schools lack counselors or any type of mental health professionals. And then you have the other element of this, which is where we see schools kind of being turned more into places of punishment than places of nourishment. We see zero tolerance approaches to discipline, meaning that even the minor infractions can lead to expulsion, which can lead to disengagement of the student from their school and from peers. Then, lastly, one of the driving forces here is reliance on police and hallways. They are referred to as school resource officers, and results often vary, but a lot of these officers are oftentimes just there to basically serve as a as a way to really bring down the hammer on some of the behaviors of the children. So instead of getting to the root cause of the children's behaviors, the issues that are going on at home, there's some schools that are just relying a little too much on these school resource officers, and so something that maybe at one point would have been a would have gotten a student a detention, all of a sudden is resulting in charges being filed against them. For example, there's been cases where students have thrown spitballs through a straw. Right, this is a very kind of classic behavior among students. While in the past, this had maybe would result in a parent-teacher conference and a detention and maybe even a suspension. Now, not only are these students getting suspended, but they're also being charged with assault against the teacher, right? And so the hope is to instill fear in the children, but again, it has there's little concern as to the root cause of the children's behavior. Of course, one cannot blame the schools themselves. One has to look at the way that society is structured and has allowed for this to happen, mainly our love affair with punishment and harsher punishment in our society. To get at the root cause of some explanations, we can look at the strain theory approach, which examines the American dream. Now, while we're really good at getting people to believe in the American dream and the economic exploits that it offers, some communities are excluded from participating in the legitimate economic market, and so what results is a small set of these individuals will innovate, as Robert Merton put it, the author of Strain Theory. And what innovation means is finding another way, finding a maybe immoral or illegitimate way to achieve the American dream. And this means creating new alternative structures that perhaps mainstream society looks down upon. So examples of innovators include things like fraudsters, white-collar criminals, drug lords and drug dealers, and many, many more career criminals who make a living out of committing crimes. Again, the idea is that innovators find alternative structures to reach the American dream of economic success, power, and control over one's life. So that about wraps it up for deviance and social control. Until next time.